In our last video, we introduced the triangle and we talked about how some of our behaviors, though well-meaning, when they create this triangle, they hurt the people we love and they hurt our relationships. Well, in this video, we're going to add an element to the triangle because there's another piece of it that can make relationships even worse and more painful. And it may be difficult, to kind of have our eyes open to this, but here's the promise, is that if you learn how to see it, if you learn how to see when you're in a triangle, and if you learn how to stay out of it, then relationships that were once exhausting and confusing can begin to thrive. Hi everybody, I'm Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And in our last video, we talked about how life, the way that life works is I'm traveling along and all of a sudden I hit a problem that I need to solve. And once I solve that problem, two things happen. The first is the problem's solved, so that's a good thing. And the second thing is I've just grown in my capacity to succeed in life by solving that problem, by learning how to set an alarm and get myself up in the morning, or learning how to do my own laundry, or learning how to cook and clean, or learning how to open a checking account, right? I've added another skill set and I have increased my capacity to succeed in life. Well, let's add another dynamic to this, because sometimes we hit a particular problem that we call conflict. And so that's a different problem because it involves another person. So the conflict may be I'm in a staff meeting and every time I speak, someone gives a sarcastic response and I need to resolve that conflict. Maybe my neighbor is building a fence, but the problem is he's building it 6 inches over onto my side of the property. The conflict may be someone is lying about me or lying to me, and I need to resolve that conflict. Sometimes there's a conflict, and it doesn't mean people are doing anything wrong. And so it may be time to plan a vacation, and I want to go to the beach, and my wife wants to go to the mountains, and we only have so much time and so much money. And so we have a conflict that we need to resolve, and this is a constant part of life. And other problems I can solve on my own, but conflict is different because I'm dealing with another human being. When we talked about solving problems, we talked about the two things that happen, that the problem stays solved and I get stronger in my capacity to succeed in life. Well, with conflict, because it involves another human being, it can play out in a few different ways. The first way that it can play out is I go directly to the person, talk to them, and we resolve the conflict, and I resolve it with this person's cooperation. So we have a conversation, and the conflict's resolved because he learns he was wrong, or I learned I was wrong, and we both learned that we were kind of partially right, partially wrong, right? But we get to an agreement that we're both comfortable with and happy with, so the conflict is resolved. And by the way, sometimes that happens, sometimes we can't do it on our own and we invite in a trusted friend to help us do that, and that's the way that conflict works. So, but the first thing is the conflict is resolved with the other person's cooperation. The second thing is I've grown in my capacity to succeed in life, just like with a problem, because learning how to do conflict is an important skill to know if you want to be successful in life. And then the third thing that happens in this instance is the relationship gets stronger because I know, and this person knows, we can do conflict well together. And so that's a trust builder. And this is a relationship that I can actually lean into, put more weight in, and put more trust in. The second way the scenario can play out is I get the conflict resolved without the person's cooperation, right? So he's building his fence 6 inches into my property, and he doesn't really care about that. And so I may need to go up a level in authority. I may need to get police involved. I may need to get lawyers involved. If it's a conflict at work, I may need to get human relation involved. But I get the conflict resolved to my satisfaction without the person's cooperation. So the conflict's resolved. The second thing is I've still developed capacity that will help me succeed in life, because this is going to be an instance that happens throughout life, is people aren't going to want to resolve the conflicts that they create. And then the third thing that happens is I've learned not to trust that person. I've learned not to lean into that relationship. And that's also a good thing to know in life. And this, by the way, is why this series on the triangle is a stage 1 relationship building skill, because this is something you want to learn early on in a relationship before you begin putting too much weight into it. And then the third way that this scenario can play out is the conflict doesn't get resolved at all. I go to the person, maybe the person's been lying about me, and I want to resolve the conflict, and it's very clear they just don't care. They don't care that they're lying about me. They want it to be my fault. They try to gaslight me. They try to blame me, right? And so the conflict doesn't get resolved. I still grow in my capacity because I learn how to deal with someone like a narcissist who can't ever be wrong and they need to have all the power. And so I get stronger, and I don't put any trust in that relationship. And so even though we don't have control over how the conflict is resolved, or if the conflict is resolved, the way we approach it, we can still get stronger and build a stronger life, because we are developing capacity and we are learning who to trust and who not to trust, which relationships to invest in, and which relationships that we need to say, I just need to back out of this altogether because this person just isn't healthy. But here's a point to keep in mind. All three of these can end up with me becoming stronger and having a better life, but they only happen if my first step is to go to the person and try to resolve the conflict. Sometimes we make a different choice in life, and this creates the triangle. Let's say I'm in a meeting and another employee interrupts me every time I try to speak. I barely get the first sentence out of my mouth and I'm interrupted, and that's very frustrating. So I have conflict with this person. But let's say instead of going to this person and saying, hey, you keep interrupting me, and giving them a chance to go, oh my goodness, you're right, I didn't even notice that. And you know what? I probably do that to other people as well. Thanks so much for pointing that out. This is really going to be helpful for me, right? And giving them an opportunity to resolve the conflict and to grow and develop. If instead of doing that, I play the role of the victim, and this person is just a villain. They interrupt me all the time. It's because they're so arrogant and they're the villain. And so instead of going to them and resolving the conflict, I go to another employee because I just need to vent, right? I need to be rescued from this anger and frustration that I'm feeling. And so I vent to another employee and I say, I can't believe every time I talk, he interrupts me. And the other employee says, I know, he does the same thing to me. He's so arrogant. And so we have this, conversation about how horrible this person is. And when we do that, the first thing that happens is the conflict is not resolved. I haven't even given this person a chance to respond to the problem that I have. The second thing that happens is our relationship does not get stronger. In fact, it goes in kind of this villain-victim role that's very difficult to get out of. And the third is I don't become stronger as a person, because I've set up this triangle that I'm going to live in now, and I haven't learned how to resolve conflict, and I haven't learned who I can trust and who I can't trust to care enough about me to resolve conflict with me. So a lot of times this triangle is created by the person who's wants to play the victim role. It's initiated by them, because instead of going to the person they have conflict, they go to someone else and just complain about this person. But sometimes the triangle is initiated by a rescuer. For example, let's say I'm a teen and my dad says, hey, you can use the car Friday night. I know you want to do that. You can do that Friday night as long as you have your room clean. If you can do that, you can take the car out. Friday night comes and I don't have the room clean. Dad's out on a business trip and mom is a rescuer, and mom doesn't want me to experience the pain of consequences of my behavior. So mom says, oh, go ahead and take the car out, have fun. Dad doesn't understand what it's like being a teenager. He's too strict. We just won't tell him, right? And so I learn, first of all, my mom's going to rescue me from the consequences of my behavior. I learned that my dad's the bad guy and he's too strict. And we create this triangle, right? And, you know, I've talked with parents where the kid goes out and the mom cleans the room just in case dad comes home, right? And so they create this triangle. And then what happens quite often then is, you know, 5 days later, mom has conflict with dad. And instead of going to dad and saying, hey, we've got this conflict, let's resolve this, she goes to the same child and says, oh, you can't believe how bad dad, oh, I know, he's so strict, isn't he, right? And this can destroy relationships. I've seen it just utterly destroy families. And it's not just moms who are the rescuers. Dad can be the rescuers. Big sisters can be the rescuers, right? It happens when anyone in the triangle becomes the rescuer and designates someone else as the villain. And the person who's the villain doesn't even get a chance to resolve the conflict. Doesn't even if they are wrong, right? They never get a chance to say, oh yeah, I was wrong. I was too strict. Thanks for pointing that out. And you create this triangle where you cannot have any closeness and peace, and it really becomes exhausting as a family. And it creates this power dynamic in the relationships where, just as we talked about last week with the triangle, the person in the victim role is the powerless person. I can't go talk to this other employee because he's too arrogant and nasty, and I can't talk to dad because he's too unreasonable, right? I'm powerless. The people who have power are the rescuer and the villain. And so the person who needs to have the power, that is the person with the conflict, has no power. The other people have power, and we create these one up, one down relationships. Whereas what we want in healthy relationships is two powerful people relating together all the time. So what we want in our relationships is this idea that if you have a conflict with someone else, you go talk to them. Don't talk to me about it. That's your conflict with them. You need to give them the first shot at resolving that problem, and you guys need to sort that out. I can't help you. And that way we move that person from the victim role back up to a role of a powerful person. Now, in our last video, we talked about how, you go through life solving problem after problem and getting more skilled and capable to succeed in life. But then at some point you hit something entirely different from a problem. You hit a crisis. And whereas a problem you solve on your own, a crisis, you need a community of people around you to help you out. Well, the same is true in this instance, that we hit conflict after conflict, and we try to resolve it as best we can. We learn who we can trust and who we can't trust in life and who to lean into. And all of that helps us to grow in our capacity and have a stronger life. But at some point, we may hit something completely different from a conflict, and that is we hit a trauma, right? Someone is being abused. Someone is being bullied. Someone's being sexually harassed. And whereas if someone is in a conflict with someone and they come to you, you want to direct them back to the person and say, hey, you got to resolve that conflict with that person. Trauma is entirely different. If someone comes to you and says, my husband's abusing me, you don't say, hey, stop, don't talk to me, go talk to your husband about that, right? You say, no, call the police. Let's call the police and get this taken care of. It's not a thing that you solve on your own. It's a thing where you need a community of strength around you. If a child tells you he's being abused at home, you don't say, well, you need to go talk to your parent. No, you call Child Protective Services and get that child protected. If someone is being bullied at school, you go to the school administration and get it stopped. If someone's being sexually harassed at work, you don't say, well, you need to go sort this out with the person who's sexually harassing you. You probably have a difference of opinion of what's going on. No, you go to human resources and get that resolved, because trauma is a completely different thing from conflict. And by the way, school conflict, it's the same thing. I talk to parents sometimes who say, well, kids need to learn how to stand up for themselves. And yeah, that's true if it's a conflict, right? But if it's a bully with someone who has, 8 inches and 50 pounds on them, this isn't the Wild West, where if someone challenges you to a gunfight, and you don't fight them, then your manhood has been sacrificed. This is a bullying situation, and you can model how to act in a civilized society when you're being bullied by going with your child to the school administrator and getting it stopped. That does not weaken your kid, because it's not a conflict that they ought to resolve on their own. Now, in upcoming videos, we're going to talk a lot more about why we get in triangles and how to stay out of triangles. We're going to start that next week with how to stay out of the triangle. But for this week, here's what I would encourage you to do, and that's just practice noticing when you're in one of these conflict triangles. Practice noticing maybe where you've become a rescuer and you see someone in conflict with someone else and you rescue them. Or practice noticing where maybe you're playing the role of the victim, and instead of going directly to the person that you have conflict with, you go to someone else to vent about it. Or practice noticing where you might be the villain. Now, it's a lot harder at first to discover if you've become the villain, because people are talking about you, but they're not talking to you. And that can happen for weeks, months, and even years, where you've just been identified as the villain and relationships are souring. It's very confusing, right? One way you can know that you've become the villain is someone will come to you and say, hey, Jane has a real problem with what you did. And right, instead of Jane coming to talk to you, they send this surrogate to talk to you, because this person's more powerful than Jane is, and you're so scary to Jane, right? And so that's one way to notice that you've become the villain. So now in coming weeks, we're going to talk about, how to stay out of the triangle and what happens when we're in the triangle, and some of the reasons why we get into triangles. And we're going to explore shame as a driving force in the triangle. But for this week, just practice noticing what triangles you may be in and how they might be impacting your relationships. Simple steps. Practice, practice, practice. That's what Heart Tools is all about.